On this episode of China Uncensored, the U.S. sends a Navy destroyer past disputed islands in the South China Sea. So, does this mean war? Hi, welcome to China Uncensored. I'm your host, Chris Chappell. You know, a wise man once said,
"You fell victim to one of the classic blunders. The most famous is never get involved in a land war in Asia."
But a sea war in Asia is a totally different matter.
Tonight, Beijing is firing a rhetorical shot across the bow after a U.S. destroyer sailed right through waters claimed by China. A newspaper closely tied to the Chinese Communist Party encouraging the government to convince Washington that China is, quote, not frightened to fight a war with the U.S. in the region.
Yes, a rhetorical shot across the bow in the metaphorical nightmare that is the South China Sea. According to international law, the area 12 nautical miles around a country's coastline is part of that country's territory. And on Tuesday this week, the U.S. guided missile destroyer, the USS Lassen, sailed within 12 nautical miles of Chinese territory. As long as you consider artificial islands built on submerged reefs part of China's territory, which no one besides China does. Recently, China has claimed a huge part of the South China Sea, a region rich in natural resources and one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. These are very legitimate claims based on very legitimate ancient maps, as long as you don't actually look at those ancient maps. So earlier this month, Beijing had threatened a decisive response if the U.S. were to sail through its made-up territorial waters. But the U.S. Navy did sail through there on Tuesday, and judging from the fact that we're still not at war, Beijing didn't exactly take a whole lot of decisive action. Well, the foreign ministry did speak some decisive words.
China will resolutely respond to any country's deliberate provocations.
And I guess the spokesman's words count as China's resolute response, which makes sense because the U.S. was never trying to provoke China in the first place.
To sail a ship through international waters is not a provocative act in any way whatsoever, and it should not be taken as a provocative act.
Sure. Just like when the U.S. flew a surveillance plane over the islands in May that the Chinese regime said it absolutely wouldn't tolerate. Or when the U.S. military did the same thing in the newly established air defense zone China created over the East China Sea at the end of 2013. And besides some saber-rattling, also nothing happened. Now, despite building artificial islands in disputed waters and then building military facilities on said islands, the Chinese regime claims these are for peaceful purposes, like providing better weather forecasts, or better service for international ships sailing through. Or don't blame them, they were bullied into it. Of course, none of these excuses has actually resolved anything, but neither has anything else. China won't stop building, and the U.S. is not going to respect made-up territorial claims in a region that affects so many of its allies. So, the U.S. will probably keep testing the water, and China will probably keep having its foreign ministry say some decisive things. So, what do you think of what the U.S. did in the South China Sea? Will there be war? Leave your comments below and subscribe for more episodes of China Uncensored. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time. Put on your sunglasses, cause it's time to party with the British entourage. Whether it's a delicious burger from OMC McDonald's or a fun-filled afternoon spent playing the Poly Station, nothing beats a good old Chinese knockoff. Especially if you like cheap cars.